This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by my book, Anti-Diet, Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is available wherever books are sold. Just go to christyharrison.com/book to order it now. That's christyharrison.com/book. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and author of Anti-Diet. Join me here every week as I interview interesting people from all different backgrounds about their paths toward peace with food and their bodies. And by the way, on this show, we bleep out diet culture stuff like weight and calorie numbers, but we don't censor swear words or other adult language, so listener discretion is advised.
Anti-diet revolution, we're for health at every size. Eat the foods you like. Food Psych.
Hey there, welcome to episode 264 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with plus-size fitness influencer and author Meg Boggs about how she made peace with food and her body after decades of disordered eating and weight stigma, how her relationship with social media has evolved from documenting her quote-unquote weight loss journey into this body-positive, fat-positive place she is now, how pregnancy and motherhood helped spark her healing from diet culture, why thin shaming and fat shaming are not the same thing, her forthcoming book, Fitness for Everybody, and so much more. I can't wait to share our conversation with you in just a moment, but first it's time for Ask Food Psych. This week's question is from a listener named Melissa who writes, I was wondering if it would be possible to do a special holiday episode because it's coming up soon and that's a very problematic time for a lot of people, and I believe it could help a lot. The problems I see the most during the holidays are diet talk during dinner and how to dissociate yourself from it, comments on bodies, weight gain versus loss, how to respond to it, and how to dissociate from it so that it does not affect us, the categorization of food as good or bad and the guilt that comes with it, comments at the table of family members on our appetite, members of the family who demonize food served at the table, comparison and judgments of bodies, the quote-unquote, I'm so bad I gained weight and gonna need to diet after the holidays talk, and more. The pandemic is stressful already, but the holiday season can add to that stress for many people, especially if our bodies have changed in the meantime, so we're more subject to stigma. So thanks, Melissa, for that great question. And before I answer, just my usual disclaimer that these answers and this podcast in general are for informational and educational purposes only, aren't a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice, and don't constitute a provider-patient relationship. So yeah, this is a great question, and it comes at a perfect time because I was planning to talk about the holidays in this episode, so you've given me a really good starting point and lots of great examples to talk about. So the first thing I want to say is that pretty much all of these issues that you raise are related to boundaries, which are the psychological and also sometimes physical lines between you and other people, right? Where you begin and end and where others begin and end. And knowing those boundaries, knowing what belongs to you and your own emotional life and what belongs to other people and belongs in their emotional life, and communicating your needs and the kinds of treatment that you will and won't accept, all of that is super important for so many things, not just dealing with diet culture at the holidays, but it's definitely an essential skill to navigate the family dynamics that come up around this time of year. And so many of us don't grow up learning or knowing about boundaries at all. Those of us from dysfunctional families especially might have a lot of enmeshment, what's known as enmeshment. It's like being entangled in other people's inner life. And boundary trampling, right? People who actually just actively trample all over our boundaries. And so, it can take years of therapy to get really comfortable with identifying and naming our boundaries and having other people respect our boundaries and choosing partners or people in our lives that will respect our boundaries. And of course, experiencing various other forms of social marginalization just compounds that difficulty, right? Marginalized people are told not to speak up, not to set boundaries, not to get their needs met in so many ways in our society. And so that just adds the difficulty of setting and honoring boundaries. So this is not something to expect yourself to immediately just be good at. I want to say that setting boundaries is an ongoing process, and it feels weird and uncomfortable and awkward and scary and all of the things at first. And, when we've been socialized to think that we don't deserve to stand up for ourselves or have our needs met, it really takes a lot of time, a lot of practice, and support from safe people in our lives to get used to drawing those lines with people and to having people honor them. So, with all that in mind about boundaries, here are some ways that you can set some boundaries on the different forms of diet culture talk and rhetoric that come up during the holidays. If someone is talking about a diet that they just did, or a diet that they're planning to do to quote unquote make up for their holiday eating. And, you can sense that they're asking for validation or compliments, maybe if they talk about a diet they just did, or they want some kind of validation that like, you're okay, you're going to be okay if you eat this food here and you're absolved of the guilt. You can say something like, I love you no matter what size your body is or what you eat. Or I know that there's that old saying, you are what you eat, but to me, you're so much more, right? We're all so much more than what we eat. That's kind of sappy, but you can adjust as needed for the level of closeness that you have with a person. Something along those lines, though, where it's like, hey, I see you, I value you outside of what you eat and what your body looks like, can be really helpful. And if you are close enough with them to say something, cute like that, then there's another useful way to deal if they're commenting on your appetite or your body or anything else about you, as well as if they're making negative comments about food and bodies in general or about something that they're eating. And that is this: to say something like, I'm actually working on making peace with food in my body because dieting has caused me a tremendous amount of pain, and I'm finally working to heal from that. So I'd really appreciate it if you could refrain from commenting on my body or saying anything negative about food when I'm around. And that, of course, requires some emotional safety with the person, right? You have to be close enough with them to reveal that about yourself. And you might not feel comfortable saying that kind of thing to someone you are super close with at a table surrounded by other family members that you're not as close with, right? So one solution that I know some clients have had success with is writing a letter, like an email, or having a phone conversation with family members that you are close with ahead of time and saying, hey, I'm healing my relationship with food. Here's where I'm at. And diet talk is really triggering for me, or it's really activating for me at this point. It really sets me back in my recovery. And so I would love to have your help in just like making sure diet talk doesn't come up at our holiday table, making sure that we like change the subject or shut it down anytime someone tries to start talking about those concepts. Maybe recruit them as allies to you in your efforts to protect yourself from diet talk. Or if there are people who might be engaging in diet talk themselves, you can say, exactly what I just said. Like, I would really appreciate it if you could refrain from commenting on my body or saying anything negative about food or your body when I'm around, just because it sets me back in my recovery. Now, if you're not as close with the person, you might try something different, right? You might not want to open up to them as much about your inner life, and that's totally understandable because, again, boundaries. Thinking about boundaries as, you get to decide who you let in. You get to decide who is going to get to hear your story or who's going to get to hear certain parts of your story, and maybe other people get to hear the full story. You have the agency and you're in charge with that. But if you're not as close with the person and you want to have boundaries around your story, you don't feel safe sharing your full story with them, you might try something like just abruptly changing the subject. They say something negative about the food on the table and how they're going to have to quote unquote work it off or whatever. And you're like, oh, I was meaning to ask, how is your new job? Speaking of work, right? Or something else that they might be excited about, something that's new in their life. Basically the equivalent of like handing a child a new toy when they start to melt down, or being like, hey, look over there, and like distracting someone from the thing that you don't want them to look at. So changing the subject, I think, is totally valid and a good approach in this kind of situation where you're not as close with the person, but you do want to set a boundary and basically get them away from the topic. So you can try changing the subject like that. You can also just find a reason to leave the room. Like, you go back to the food table for more, or you're filling your drink, or you're checking on a kid or a pet or relative who went to go sit in the other room and watch TV or something like that. One of the things that really has stuck with me from my trauma therapist is the idea that I'm not frozen in place. I have the choice to move around or leave the situation, even if my trauma response might make me feel like I'm glued to one spot, because the fight, flight, freeze thing is very real when you're activated. So I think having a physical escape plan is totally helpful with this kind of stuff. And I know that leaving the room is easier to do when you're able-bodied. And if you use a mobility aid or you need help to get up from a seat or something like that, then it might take a little more maneuvering to leave the room. But even then, there may still be the option to do that. And you could also try to plan ahead a little bit so that you're sitting in a place at the table that's easier to get out from in case you need to make a break for it. And because this is a COVID holiday season, hopefully many people listening will be doing virtual visits with family rather than gathering together with a bunch of folks from different households, right? Because those are unfortunately the kinds of gatherings that are riskiest for transmitting the disease unless everyone has tested and quarantined. And, that's really hard to coordinate usually. So if you are on like a video call with a bunch of family members eating a holiday meal together, as I'm planning to be with my family, and someone starts in with a diet talk in that scenario, you could try just muting the conversation and or going into another room and just like leaving it a blank screen. You don't even really have to go anywhere. You could just like scoot down on the couch off screen, right? Just make it seem like you got up to get a drink of water or something. One other thing you might try with someone you're less close with is to just make a little quip that plants a seed for them. Something light, something that's not too debatey. But, if they say something negative about a particular food at the table, you could be like, great, that means more of it for me. I really love this dish, Or, yeah, I trust my body to figure it out. I'm okay. Something like that, just to kind of make them think a little bit. And again, you don't have to get into a real debate with them, but it kind of tips your hand as to like how you're relating to food and your body and maybe makes them a little curious. Now, you mentioned a couple times in your question, how can I dissociate if this does come up? And I want to say that setting boundaries, I think, is a really helpful way to just remind yourself and the other person that this is me, this is my stuff, this is you and your stuff, and I'm not going to let your stuff affect me or permeate me in the way that it could otherwise if you weren't aware of those boundaries. And you can even just mentally set a boundary for yourself, like even say worst case scenario, you're stuck at the table, you're trapped in a corner, you're not able to get out easily, your efforts at changing the subject haven't worked, and someone is going on and on about their diet or what they're going to do in the new year, or like poking at your body and saying that you've gained weight or something like that, right? Like just the worst case possible scenario. Even in that situation, which is awful, and I hope you don't find yourself in, you can still have some agency in terms of setting boundaries in your own mind. Even if you don't feel comfortable speaking up in that moment, or you've tried and it hasn't worked, you can still in your head just repeat to yourself, like, that's bullshit. What they're saying is bullshit. This is not true. I know where I stand. I'm anti-diet. I'm not going to listen to this. They do them. I do me. Right? This is maybe what works for them. They're caught up in diet culture. Maybe they're one of those unicorns for whom this stuff doesn't lead to long-term weight cycling and disordered eating. But I know where I stand. I know my experience. I know what's right for me, and I'm going to continue doing what's right for me and let them do them. So there's that mental piece of it too, that, even if you're in a really tricky situation, you can still make it better for yourself by talking yourself through it, setting the boundaries in your own mind. Now, keep in mind that setting a boundary, like if it goes well and you set the boundary in real life, setting that boundary is only part of the process. The other part is making sure that other people respect the boundary, and that can take some repetition. So even when people really love you and want to do right by you and are like generally empathetic people, sometimes their fat phobic beliefs are so deeply ingrained and their diet talk is so reflexive that you need to constantly remind them of the boundary you set and explain how they've violated it. And so that doesn't mean that they don't care about you or that your boundary isn't valid, because it absolutely is. It just means that they're dealing with a lot of internalized diet culture stuff themselves, and that's going to take some time to unpack and untangle. And they might not even see it, right? We've talked a lot on this podcast about, the notion that culture is the water we're all swimming in. I think that originally comes from David Foster Wallace. Maybe it goes back further than that. But, the idea that the culture is the water and that fish don't see water, right? They don't know what water is. They're just swimming in it. And that's kind of how diet culture is with most people. Most people don't see the water that we're swimming in, the fact that it is diet culture, that it is so problematic and oppressive and harmful. They just see what they know, what they've been taught, all that received wisdom about food and weight and bodies. And so I think understanding that that's their shit again, right? That's their baggage. It doesn't have to be yours, is really helpful in reinforcing your boundaries too, and saying, again, that's kind of what we were talking about before. Like, I'd rather you not mention your friend's diet. It's just the same as if you were mentioning my diet, right? Commenting on my body is definitely something that triggers me and is harmful, but also commenting on your own body actually is really difficult for me to hear. Another interesting thing about boundaries is that not only do they help protect your recovery from diet culture, because that is the main point, right? But they also have the potential to inspire other people. Because if you clearly assert that you will not be tolerating any negative food or body talk from the people around you, especially with those people that you're really close to, not only will you carve out a space for yourself to heal, but you also might spark some curiosity in those people that you're talking to. Because they might wonder, why can't we talk about food in terms of good and bad? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with saying something negative about my own body? And so those questions are the kind of thing that this boundary setting can spark. And that gives you an opportunity, if you're in a place to take on this burden, which not everyone is, and I do not recommend doing this if you don't feel ready. But if you do feel ready, you can explain why this kind of diet culture thinking can be so harmful. You can explain why you've jumped into the anti-diet world, why you've turned your back on diet culture or are doing your best to turn your back on diet culture and recover from it. And again, you don't owe anyone that explanation. You can just kind of plant seeds and be like, anyway, change of subject. But, it could be helpful to other people too to hear you set those boundaries. One other thing that I think is helpful to remember around the holidays when dealing with other people's diet culture stuff is that just because someone is supposedly, quote unquote, succeeding with a particular diet now, or, this will really become relevant in a few weeks with New Year's, right? And in January, they'll be like, this is the thing, right? And they're all on their high horse about some kind of diet or quote unquote lifestyle change or plan, program, protocol, template, wellness, reboot, whatever they call it. They're going to be riding high on that stuff. But just because they're quote unquote succeeding with that particular diet now doesn't mean that's going to be the case in a year or 6 months or even 2 weeks. So we all know the dismal statistics on diet failure. I talked about that a couple weeks ago in the episode we reposted with Carrie Dennett. So up to 98% of diets fail long-term, or weight loss attempts fail within 5 years. Usually people reach the lowest point of their weight loss, or their weight reaches its lowest point around 6 months in. And then within a year, they've regained a lot of the weight back, if not all of it, right? And certainly within 5 years. And that's just for the people for whom dieting or intentional weight loss actually does something. There's another large segment of the population for whom it doesn't actually cause the number on the scale to really budge, whatever they do, however they change their eating. There's a certain point at which, especially if you've been a chronic dieter, you become diet resistant. And so best case, quote unquote, best case scenario for diet culture is that someone is losing weight in the short term and they're talking it up and being a quote unquote success story. But again, take the long view. Remember that that diet, those results are most likely not going to last. And, the person's probably going to be on a weight cycle trajectory for many years to come. And that's really sad and it sucks and it's not good for people's health, right? It's not good for their well-being mentally, emotionally, or physically. And so I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but just, when you observe that with people in your life, be aware of what it is. And again, be aware of where you begin and end. This is not my stuff. This is their stuff. And I can kind of see where this is headed, even though they're talking about this diet like it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, although of course they're not eating bread because they're on this diet, right? Take the long view. Remember that it's most likely not going to be the end all be all that they're making it out to be, and that you're on a different path and it's a path that's right for you. Finally, I just want you to know that no matter how normalized diet culture is in your family or at your holiday table, that's not how it has to be. And there are actually tens of thousands of us out here in the anti-diet movement who get what you're going through, and we're with you in spirit during this holiday season. We're mentally squeezing your hand in solidarity when your aunt starts talking about her New Year's reset plans. And we're rolling our eyes alongside you when your cousin goes off about gluten. And we get what you're going through because we've been there too. So just know that there are so many people around the world who are going through this right now, and you're not alone. And if you want a more real-time community to help you navigate these issues, we do have a great private community forum inside my Intuitive Eating Fundamentals course, where there's lots of discussion and support for holiday diet talk and dealing with that and dealing with all the other crap that comes up at this time of year. So if that's of interest to you, you can learn more and sign up at christyharrison.com/course, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Above all, though, please just remember that you have every right to enjoy food, to eat leading up to the holiday meal, and keep eating regularly, because eating regularly really is a form of self-care. And you have every right to keep eating just because something tastes good, and to feel uncomfortably full without having it mean anything about your worthiness as a person, and to change the subject or leave the room when diet culture creeps into the conversation. So I'm rooting for you, and I'm wishing you as happy a holiday season as possible, given this weird moment in time that we're living in. So thanks again to Melissa for that question. And if you want to submit your own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, just go to christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions. And then, as I mentioned, I have my Intuitive Eating Fundamentals course where I actually answer listener questions every single month. And you can ask me multiple questions and have me answer them much more quickly than I can on this podcast. And we have that great community forum where people are just so there for each other and supporting each other through the holidays and beyond. It's a really great space to connect with hundreds of other people that are on this anti-diet path with you. If you're ready to break free from diet culture and reclaim the life it stole from you, learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by my book, Anti-Diet: Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is having its 1-year anniversary this week if you're listening to this episode the day it comes out. The book is available wherever books are sold, and it's a great companion to this podcast because it really goes into the scientific basis and really goes into depth around so many of the ideas that we're always talking about here. And there are tons of new stories and interviews that I haven't included on the podcast or anywhere else before that really help illustrate how diet culture steals your life and how you can take it back. And if you like listening to me talk about this stuff, you can get the audiobook to hear me read it to you. Just go to christyharrison.com/book to order it now. That's christyharrison.com/book, and maybe consider ordering an extra copy for any anti-diet or anti-diet curious people in your life. And now, without any further ado, let's go to my conversation with Meg Boggs. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
All right. Well, let's just get right into it.
Yeah, right in.
Growing up when I was in early and elementary years, my family had like a very not strict, but just, it was very routine. So like every evening we would sit down, we'd have dinner as a family, and it was never about restricting. It was always about make sure you eat all on your plate. That's kind of the mentality that I had growing up until about fourth or fifth grade. That's kind of when everything changed for me, and my relationship completely changed with food. So before, it was very normal. I was encouraged by my family to make sure I'm eating. My dad would always tell us, make sure that you finish your plate, because some people don't get a plate, and you just have to make sure that, you're appreciating it and enjoying your food. And so that was actually, I think back to that, and I'm like, wow, that was actually really great advice from my dad growing up. But it kind of changed whenever I was about, I don't know, fourth or fifth grade. I started getting bullied a lot at school, and it was all directed about my size and how I wasn't quick enough on the playground. It was very strange. I don't really remember why I was kind of targeted, because looking back at myself, I really wasn't a bigger kid. I was a pretty average size kid when I was in fourth or fifth grade. And at that time, when that all started happening, I did start recognizing things that my mom was doing when it comes to dieting, and just I could tell that she felt very insecure around that time. And that's when she went on a very strict diet. And I'll kind of never forget that, because she just shrunk, and it was really, really rapid. Like her whole body just changed, and she seemed very happy. And I was very happy for her, because I just thought, wow, like she's doing good for herself. So at the time I thought, well, that must mean that losing weight and being thin is what I need to do in order to be not bullied so much at school. Like maybe people won't call attention towards my body if my body looks like what's seen kind of on TV and in magazines and things like that. So at that time, I really started paying attention to what I was eating. Even though, like, at the time, I'll say this, my mom, she never pushed her diet on me. She never talked about how the rest of the family needed to diet. It was very much her own personal thing that she was going through. But I did recognize it immediately. Whenever we would sit down at dinner and my dad would say, make sure that you eat all of your food. Like, you need to clean your plate by the end of dinner. You can't get up and leave until you're done. In my mind, I was like, but mom doesn't do that. Like, she's actually restricting her food. Like, why are you encouraging me to eat it? So it was very conflicting thoughts. I mean, I was in middle school, almost in junior high. And by the time I got to junior high, I was 100% convinced that I'm going to have to eventually lose weight. Like, I was in sixth grade. I was like, I have to lose weight. And I started athletics in seventh grade. And then my food relationship at that point was like, just eat, very, very little. Like, once it's dinner time, either say you're not hungry or say you're going to take your food to the room. I was like, junior high kid. So I was very, I don't want to sit at the dinner table kind of mentality. But all of seventh grade, I ended up losing weight. I was running every day and very obsessed with athletics and sports. And it was very fun. Like, I saw it as something fun, but at the same time, I was losing weight. I was getting smaller. People were noticing me. By the end of seventh grade, we walked into a swim party or something at the end of the year. And like, the girls were coming up to me and they were like, take off your clothes. You don't need to be wearing a t-shirt anymore. Like, let's see it. And then I remember lifting my shirt and they looked at me and they were like, ugh, I thought it would look different. And like, that's always stuck in my head, because I'm like, well, I did lose weight. I did stop eating the way that, was supposed to be the key to success. And people are still saying that I don't have the perfect body. And then it just kind of escalated from then on until now.
That sounds so painful. I mean, of course, I think that would stick in your mind as like, okay, all of this stuff that I've been doing has not, quote unquote, worked if they're still saying this. So I have to do more. I have to like keep going, basically.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, by the time I was a senior, I was having very frequent, just complete panic attacks. And I just remember like feeling so confused, because I was having so many mental health struggles that were usually like catapulted by these feelings of restriction all the time. And it was just so normal. It wasn't something that anyone was concerned about. Like, oh, you're just not hungry right now. Like, that's strange. Why are you so upset all the time? Like, nobody ever really made those connections. until the end of my senior year, whenever I just completely lost it. And I was just like screaming on our front lawn. And my mom was just like cradling me in her arms, like, what is wrong? Like, you have to tell me what is wrong. And I didn't know. I mean, at the time, it felt like it was like some demon inside of me. But looking back, it was definitely all of these disordered thoughts and feelings that I was having that were just completely unrecognized.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I mean, it sounds like you got so much praise for losing weight that nobody was worried about it. They were worried about the mental health struggles, but they weren't connecting it to the eating.
Right. And I spent about a month or two, I can't really remember, but my parents did end up, after like the final episode where they just were very concerned for me because they did start noticing marks on my arms and marks on my legs, and they had to put all the sharp objects in the house away. They were really like worried about me. And so they decided that I needed to spend some time in an adolescent unit. And so I spent, I think it was a few weeks there. And the entire time, like, we would have group sessions and like, therapeutic moments that were supposed to just change our lives. But we never talked about our food, our relationship with food. Like, not one time did that come up. It was, even though I knew like deep down that that was my issue, like it had to have been something about food. It's something about my body and my body image and how I was stripped from something I love doing, which was sports. I really love sports. And then I got into a huge fight and I was kicked out of athletics because people were just constantly making fun of my size. And that dream was just kind of let go. So, I mean, by the time I was a senior, I just completely lost it and spent that time away. And it's just crazy to me that we would never talk about body image or your relationship with food or just your mental health in general. It was very just, you're being a troublemaker and you're going to take this medicine and then it's going to be better once you leave. So it was just very odd.
It sounds like a real missed opportunity, like a real oversight to not talk to adolescents about their relationship with food. Like, that's the time when, for so many people, these disordered eating issues spark, and body image issues too.
Yeah. It just always felt like I was being treated like, oh, there's nothing wrong. Like, you're in the band, you're in the student council and class council, and you're doing great. Your grades are great. Like, there can't be anything wrong with you. Like, you have your roof over your head. Like, there's people that have it worse than you. So what are you so upset about? That's kind of how it always felt. And so from that moment on, once I graduated high school, once I went to college, I was so done with that. I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. I started eating and eating and eating. I didn't do any sort of physical activity. I just completely gave up on just enjoying life. I thought, this is what my life's going to be. And it just is what it is.
Wow, that sounds really painful. And it sounds like, I mean, when you're describing the whole situation of like mental health struggles being sparked by restriction, it makes me think of the Minnesota starvation experiment and like how these volunteers they were men, they were young college age men. So it's not like a totally generalizable experience, but it's like they were selected for their mental health. Basically, they were screened into the experiment for being like in really good mental health, very, quote unquote, well-adjusted specimens. And through starvation, they developed all of these mental health issues. And some of them even like I think one guy had like a psychotic break and had to leave the experiment. A couple of people got kicked out of the experiment, like it's wild what that kind of deprivation will do to your mental health.
Yeah. I'm sure that has so much to do with it from all those years, that it was just so normal. And it was normal the entire time. Like, it was up until I was 30. I mean, I had just turned 30. I just had my daughter, and it was very normal to be like, okay, well, you're going to get back on the diet, get back on the train, and you're going to, do great. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but whenever I had my daughter, the previous 2 or 3 years, I was on a weight loss journey, and I had finally reached that point, because I did give up on the whole, I'm going to restrict and I'm going to, punish myself for all of this. I gave up on that for, years, for most of my 20s, while I was in college and while I first started working. When I started reaching the end of my 20s, I realized that all these doctors are telling me that if I want to have a family, I had gotten married. I really thought that the next step would be talking to my doctor about, starting our family and having a child. And when it immediately turned to weight loss and how, well, that will never happen. Like, unfortunately, I can't be your doctor if, you do get pregnant. So maybe that's something you need to consider, or else you're going to have to switch doctors. And so at the time I thought, okay, well, they're serious. They mean business. So I need to make sure that I start losing weight. Like, maybe everybody was right. Maybe all this time, everybody was right. And I still have that problem. Is I even recently, this whole video came out about me and how I'm just a fraud. And, it hurt me so bad. And I remember thinking, like, gosh, what if they're right? What if I do need to just go back to that and restrict and make that part of my life again? Like, what if that's the healthy thing to do? Like, what if they're right? And I catch myself doing that all the time. Like, it has never stopped. It's something I know that it's always going to creep back up, but I feel like each time it does, I'm a little bit more powerful in my response.
I mean, I'm curious, like how you sort of navigate that question, and also how you came to this place of, I'm not doing that to myself anymore when you got to college. Because it sounds like something in you knew that it was harmful, knew that it was bad, and that it wasn't the healthy way to live.
Yeah. When I first got to college, I think I just felt very free. Like, I didn't have anybody, like, my parents really weren't like that at all towards me, but I didn't feel like I had anybody hovering. I felt like I was finally going to figure out who I was and what I loved. I had just, I was getting this music degree, and it's what everybody told me was, I was going to be this great music teacher. I was so talented. I got a lot of praise for that. And so it made me feel confident in it. But at the same time, I felt like that wasn't my true passion. I always had a very big passion for movement and physical activity and sports. And that's what makes me feel alive. So when that left and I was like, that I have to do music now, I just thought, if I'm going to have to do music and I'm going to have this career that is not really my passion, and that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, I'm at least going to enjoy food. Like, I'm at least going to eat what I want and just go all in. And I really went all in. Like, I had been so deprived for so long that every day on my way home from school or work or wherever I was, I would stop and I would get fast food. That was it was comforting. It was like, I'm doing this for me. And it felt like freedom a little bit, even though I still felt like my job and my career was going towards something that I was very unhappy with. But everybody was so convinced that it was going to be the right thing for me. So throughout the college years, that's kind of what I was thinking. Well, if I'm giving up my rest of my life and my career, I'm at least going to give myself permission to eat.
That sounds like it was a real coping skill for this feeling of being trapped in a career that you didn't want. And how ironic that music, which, for some people is so liberating and creative, was like this prison for you almost, that it didn't feel like what you wanted to do at all.
Yeah, like, I loved it. I really did. And I still do. But I just never saw myself as somebody who would be like excited to go to work and, teach music. Like, that didn't feel fulfilling for me. It didn't. I loved the kids when I was working with them, like the families and the community. Like, it was all very like warm and fuzzy for me. Like, it was something that I did feel at home with, but at the same time, it didn't make me happy, like, in that way. And I struggled for that for a long time. And I finally broke. My panic attacks started coming on really, really strong. Me and my husband had just got married. I moved to a new school. I was excited about the year. And I had a very intense panic attack as I drove into the parking lot one day. I don't know what happened, but something in me was just like, you've got to stop. Like, you've got to stop this. Like, I was crying on the way home, usually from work, and just like cleaning up my tears and pretending like I was totally fine. And that panic attack that I had, I was in the middle of driving, and some of the teachers saw me, and they ran over as I was pulling in to the car and opened the door and like pressed on the brake to stop the car and like help me out. And just like they did not know what to do. It was the first time they had seen me like that. And that was the exact day that I resigned, that I let go of that whole, degree and everything that I had done. And that was definitely like probably one of the hardest days of my life, for sure.
It sounds really hard. It sounds like your body and your brain kind of just told you enough is enough. But that's hard. It's hard to have that sort of thrown in your face like that by a panic attack, and then having to walk away from everything you had put in until that point must have been really hard.
It was. I mean, my husband had just gotten married the month before, so I'm sure that was to an outsider that probably looked very interesting and suspicious in a way. But I mean, we had been together at that time for like 8 years or 7 years or something. So, I mean, after that, it was only about a year later or less than a year, actually, a couple months later, when I got a new job. I was a administrative assistant working at a music school at the front desk. So I wasn't teaching, but I was still around music. And it at least was something that felt something I could do for now and continue making money for now. But by May, I think, is when I had that conversation with my doctor, and they were like, you need to lose weight if you're going to have kids. And so that's when the whole May of 2015, when the weight loss journey and Instagram kind of began for me.
So did you take to Instagram at first to document the weight loss journey?
Oh, yes. I already had an Instagram account, but it was very like pictures of my Starbucks coffee cup kind of thing. Very basic account. So I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and start, documenting this journey. So I started doing the before and after photos. I would take pictures of my, super healthy food, and, in quotes, super healthy, all over my Instagram. It was all about positive quotes, just directed towards weight loss. And that's what I thought that I was going to accomplish. I thought, wow, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to completely change my life. And didn't quite go that way.
Yeah. What happened?
Well, at the beginning, I started dropping weight pretty quickly, just because I hadn't worked out in years. I'd been a decade since I was in marching band at that point. And gosh, first couple months, I was on this high, and it was like, wow, I think I figured this out. I think I know what I'm doing. I was not eating very good at all. It was really bad. I was eating for dinner and for breakfast. And that's pretty much what this diet was. Eat very, very little every day. And I mean, I was starving. I just remember, like, I had been hungry in the past, but like this was a different level of hunger. And what I would eventually start doing is just wearing, and that was kind of my punishment for if your stomach growls, or if you're thinking of having a snack, like, you're going to push through this and you're going to do this. And I would tell myself, it's for your future kids. This is for your future kids. Like, if you don't do this, you're not going to have kids. So you need to get it together. And that was my mindset for every workout, for every meal, for everything. I just thought it was going to work out for me. And when the weight did start, fluctuating a little bit and start dropping a little bit, I really thought I found the right thing for me, until it stopped, until I hit this moment where I really needed to start eating more. Like, I wasn't, like, my vision was like starting to be weird. I just felt fatigued at all times. I could barely make it through a workout for more than minutes without feeling like I was going to pass out and just start like seeing stars. But I continued doing it. I said, well, I'm going to change my diet. So I'm going to eat a little bit more. And this time I'm going I'm going to push myself more on exercise. It's time. And so I would exercise a ton intensely, not just like for a walk, but like an intense workout. And I, gosh, try not to like get emotional, but the compliments that I received were what made me feel like I was this horrible person. Like, you're doing so good. It was all the comments on Instagram, even though it was just like family and friends. I didn't have a big account or anything. And it was just all the people that I love just congratulating me all the time. And to feel so horrible, like this could not be health. Like people were telling me that this was health and that I was doing this for my health and it was going to get better. And it only got worse. It only got worse and worse and worse until I got pregnant. So, I mean, had I not gotten pregnant, I don't know how much further I would have taken it, especially since for like the 2 or 3 months prior to me getting pregnant, I actually stopped losing weight altogether. Even though nothing changed, I was still pushing myself to the limit on food and exercise. I stopped losing weight completely. And I was so frustrated with that I was willing to do what it took for the next level. I was always pushing it a little bit further. And that's probably why I actually stopped, because my body was just like, whoa, like this is wrong. Like we can't function like this. And when I got pregnant, in my mind, I was like, I'm going to still work out. I'm going to still try and do what's best for this body. I had a slightly different mindset, like the needle moved the other direction, like, I don't know, half a centimeter. I started thinking about my child now, and now I needed to do what's good for them. So I started slowing down a bit on exercising too much. I started focusing a little bit more on eating things that were fulfilling for me, because I knew I needed, if I felt full, then that would mean that they're full. And those little things started kind of pushing me the opposite direction of this diet culture obsession of mine. So by the time that I had her, in my mind, I thought, okay, I need to start dieting again. I need to start getting back in shape. I need to start doing XYZ. But for some reason, like every time I held her, every time we rocked in the rocking chair and I just would look down at her, I just kept thinking like, what is she going to grow up and think about herself? And that was always my go-to is, what is she going to think about herself? And how am I going to contribute to that? And since then, that has just grown. That mindset of mine has grown and grown and grown. And I want to do what's best for her. And doing what's best for her is going to always be doing what's best for me, because then she'll understand, hopefully, that she can do the same thing, that she's just as worthy, she's just as strong, she's just as amazing, and can do anything that she puts her mind to and is passionate about. And I never want to hold her back from that. I never want to hinder that from her. So that's kind of what I always kind of call my aha moment, but it started very small and just eventually progressed into what it has for me today.
God, that's amazing. I'm so glad that happened. Like, what serendipity to get pregnant when you did, to help kind of push you to stop the disordered behaviors a little bit, or give up some of them to help yourself have a safe pregnancy. And then that spiraled further when you had her and got to have that reminder. Because it's making me think of what you said about your mom when you were growing up, how you saw her dieting and she never pushed it on you, but still her dieting and her comments or the way that she treated her body made you feel like you had to lose weight. And it's so common, like that gets transmitted. Parents don't necessarily intend, I mean, of course they don't intend it most of the time, right? It just happens. Kids pick up on it.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what happened with me. And, with my mom, I feel like she was doing it for her health. She did see it that way. And she didn't always diet. Like eventually she stopped and wasn't as interested in that. It was kind of back and forth with her whole life. And the big thing that kind of changed, I think, was when she was diagnosed with diabetes. And a lot of my family actually is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And that was something that always was in the back of my mind was, oh, well, you have to be careful because there's like this whole stigma around it where it's your fault. And I feel like she's always felt like it's her fault. And I've never been able to have this conversation with her to like tell her that it's not your fault. Like this isn't you taking care of your health and focusing on your health. Like it's not your fault that you're in this situation. Like I wish she would stop blaming herself. And that's, that still affects me to this day because I know it is so hard for her because you can't, like, it's very, with diabetes, she's always getting things about, okay, well, here's the diet for that. And I honestly don't know how I would handle that situation. I feel like that was something that was always kind of warned for me, like warning signs of like, okay, be very careful. Like make sure that you're not eating too much sugar, you're not eating too much of this and that. And I don't know, the diabetes thing, that's a very sensitive like topic for me. And I feel like I never get a chance to talk about it, especially since it's not my experience. But I just wanted to say that, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's so important to say is that if you have diabetes, it's not your fault. And there's so much in our culture that makes people feel like it is. And that makes them feel like it's a matter of personal responsibility to like fix it. And you can put it, quote unquote, into remission, like all of these things that are so harmful that drive people so much further into disordered eating a lot of the time. And I talked about this with Lauren Newman on, I think it's episode 225. Don't quote me because I don't have a photographic memory, but that number is popping into my head. But we'll link to that in the show notes. We talked about diabetes, and she's a diabetes specialist and does health at every size and intuitive eating with diabetes, and is very adamant that you don't have to lose weight to manage diabetes and you don't have to eat a restrictive diet. And in fact, eating restrictively can make things worse, can exacerbate the diabetes. Weight cycling and weight stigma can make things worse. So I think whatever diet culture tells us about diabetes, I think we have to understand that sometimes, especially for people with a propensity toward disordered eating, doing those things can actually make the situation worse, can actually worsen the diabetes. And no matter what, it's not your fault, right? It's a genetic disease that has lots of factors that go into it. It's not like you can just, eat a certain way and magically avoid it.
Right. And it's like, I've just never understood the obsession with like your health status being something that, makes you a better person or makes you have this moral like virtue. I don't know. It's very strange to me. I've never understood why that is. And I feel like I'm still struggling to understand why, especially for like me. I shared on my Instagram a couple of weeks ago how I was trying to go to the doctor for my high blood pressure. I've had a lot of anxiety over the last couple of months. I mean, hello, 2020 pandemic.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of reasons why.
Pretty understandable.
Yeah. And so I got high blood pressure and I was sharing that experience. And it's interesting how so many people, I had my community is incredible, but there's always those few people who creep up on my page and they just criticize me for it. Like, aha, I got you. You're not healthy. So you need to check yourself. What I'm saying is not valid because I take medication for high blood pressure. That makes no sense to me.
It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. And I feel like it just shows the bigotry, right? It's like they're looking for an excuse to demonize you and to say that your opinion is not valid and to dismiss you. And so using personal experiences and disclosures against you as supposed evidence of your unworthiness, which is just bullshit. It's total bullshit.
It really is.
Ugh. It's ridiculous. I think it comes too from the healthism in our culture, right? That health is seen as this personal responsibility and this barometer of worthiness. And if you're healthy, you're good, you're moral, you're, upstanding. And that has so many roots in like religion and the religious roots of diet culture. It's all just so problematic and not true. Someone is not worth more just because they're in better health or worth less because they have a health condition. That's just not true. Human beings are morally valuable no matter what and morally equal.
Could not agree more.
I mean, I want to talk a little bit about like the sort of pushback you get online and how you navigate that. But I'm also curious about going back chronologically to like around when you had your daughter, the messages that you had gotten about pregnancy and what it was going to entail to have a baby and what the reality actually was. Because I know from reading your blog that like when you gave birth to her and when you got pregnant with her even, you were still in a larger body. Like you never got thin. You never were, even with all the dieting and the extreme exercise and stuff, you were a larger bodied mom and got pregnant larger bodied. And that was totally contrary to what doctors had told you.
Yeah. I mean, I lost a ton of weight, but I was still considered plus size. Like I still had to shop in the plus size section. I wasn't like this thin person all of a sudden. So I hadn't reached like my quote unquote goal weight on my journey. I was excited to be pregnant, but in my mind, I did have those feelings of like, oh gosh, like I'm going to gain weight. I know that's what happens. People say you gain weight when you get pregnant. I'm going to have to lose all that over again. So in my mind, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, every single time I have a child, I'm going to have to lose a ton of weight. Like, this is not fun. This is not fair. Why do I have to go through this? It's very upsetting for me. At the same time, being very happy that I was pregnant. But in the beginning, when I was pregnant, I thought that working out was going to be something that would remain the same in my mindset for it. But I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm like, all these things when I talk about them, like, it's so difficult.
Yeah. Oh, I totally understand. It's really emotional.
Because, I had dreamed of that moment for a long time of it being pregnant. And then when it happened and me like slightly being disappointed about it. And I hate to say that, but it's very true. Like, I felt like my journey was unfairly cut short, which is just not true at all. But I when it comes to pregnancy in general, I had no idea what to expect. I mean, my mom told me that I needed to have some like big diapers. She was like, get the biggest ones. And I was like, whoa, like what? And that's all I knew. That was the only thing that she kind of prepared me for. It was like, okay, well, I'll walk you through the rest of it, but just make sure you have big, like the biggest diapers and pads that you can find. And I was like, all right, well, sounds good. But I mean, other than that, no clue. Did not know what to expect throughout all of pregnancy, throughout postpartum. There was really nothing that I could find on Google that talked about, I mean, actually, no, that's definitely a lie. That's how I found Jen from Plus Mommy. She is the first kind of platform that I found online that was like directed towards somebody like me in a celebratory way. Normally, everything else was, you know how it is when you Google plus size and it's like not exactly friendly. But her platform I found, and it was about plus size pregnancy and what to expect. And that I found early on in my postpartum. So like I had already had Macy. It was maybe my second or third month postpartum. So that was when I first found her. I must not have Googled right, because when I Googled it later on, she popped up. And I know she had been doing it before then. But that I didn't find out all this information until I found her platform at 3 months postpartum. That would have been really helpful. So definitely check her out if you're somebody who's plus size, pregnant, trying to conceive. She's incredible. But I had no idea, no clue.
Did that like start to shift your thinking? Because I know obviously at some point your Instagram shifted too. It became much more about celebrating your body at its larger size and showing like fitness and self-love. And much more of a turn toward body positivity than this quote unquote weight loss journey stuff that you had been doing before, right? So curious when that transition happened.
It was probably, I was about 12 weeks postpartum. I was still kind of posting my back at the gym photos, but not nearly as intense as before. But around 12 weeks postpartum, I don't know what got in me, but for some reason, all I would see on social media or online about plus size postpartum bodies it was really just not positive at all. Like, that's kind of the best way to put it. I can't remember her name, but I saw a post that kind of set me off because she was posting a picture of, her postpartum body. She was plus size, and she had a lot of just really horrible comments on it. And it wasn't somebody with a platform. It was somebody who was just, I think I searched like a hashtag or something. And she had like 100 comments that were just like the vomit emoji and the pig emoji and all these things. And then I would go to like a postpartum, there's a page called like postpartum or something. And I was scrolling through that because I was just, I was newly postpartum mom trying to learn about my body. Like, this was nothing like I expected. And to just only see people who were thin, who had just stretchy stomach skin, who didn't have any fat, it was like the plus size women in the postpartum world didn't exist, is what it felt like. It was just, there was no representation at all. I felt so frustrated because, again, I was just thinking like, well, what if Macy ends up being a plus size woman? Like, I just kept thinking about her experiences and how that's just not fair. Like, why would somebody who is plus size not have any representation? And that's when I started looking around. I was like, okay, well, if this is happening in the postpartum world, have I really just not been paying attention to the world around me? So I started paying attention to things like, the commercials, to my favorite TV shows, to who I was even following on social media. And it started making me realize that me being a fat person was very, very unaccepted and just not something anybody wants to see. Nobody wants to see that. And I think it was exactly 12 weeks postpartum, I was so angry that day. And it gave me this like burst of like, you know what, like, I'm going to post a picture. And it was after I saw that woman's photo. I thought, I'm going to post a picture and I'm not even going to pull like my pants down or anything to show my stomach. I'm just going to make myself a little crop top and I'm going to wear it with my leggings. And I'm just going to post it and I'm going to open my heart a little bit because I'm really frustrated right now. And that's what I did. I got a pair of scissors. I cut off the sleeves. I cut off the bottom half. I put it on and I went to my mom and I was like, Mom, can you take this picture of me? And she was just looking at me like, okay. Like, it was very strange. She had never seen me wear a crop top before, but she just went with it. She took my picture. I posted it online and I just kind of shared my thoughts about how, this is who I am. And if you're not okay with it, and if it's not something that you're, going to celebrate with me, that's fine, but I'm going to celebrate anyway, because I'm so tired of everybody telling me what I need to look like, what I need to eat, what I need to do with my life. And I'm going to start being me. And this is me. And I think that's how I started the whole post was, this is me. I've never talked about myself in this way, but let's do this. And from that moment forward, because I started getting like little messages here and there from people saying, thank you for posting that. That really made my whole day. I've been struggling. I was just having all these conversations with women suddenly who were going through the same thing, who just felt very alone when it comes to postpartum, but also very alone because they were just not represented anywhere and they felt like they were unworthy. And I completely understood that because it was what I was feeling my entire life.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's so powerful to give people representation and to share things that you feel vulnerable about and show people that they're not alone. I think it goes a long way. I mean, that's part of why I started this podcast, honestly. It was feeling like people needed a space to connect over disordered eating issues and, fraught relationships with food that I wasn't seeing anywhere else at the time. So, wanted to create that space. And what happened for you from then? Like, how did that sort of launch you into this next phase of your career?
Well, I started my blog actually like a few days after I had Macy. I just wanted to share my birth story. So that's the very first thing that I did before the 12 weeks, I guess. But it wasn't on I don't know if it was on my Instagram, but I know I created my own little blog website. And I was like, I'm just going to put this story out there. That's all I'm going to do. But once I did that and that post a few weeks later, and I started getting a lot of messages and having these conversations, that's when I decided, okay, I need to show up. I need to keep showing up because this is making me feel good that at least there's people who are understanding, and it's making me realize that it's not just me, that I'm not alone in this. So at the beginning, I didn't do any fitness stuff. I actually didn't start doing that until I think earlier this year is when I kind of started diving into that a little bit more. But I only would share like little snippets of me working out or doing something physical in my stories. And I noticed that people were responding to that. That was just blowing me away. Like the amount of replies I would get to those stories, the amount of views I was randomly getting on my stories, going from like 10 views to like 5,000 views a day was just, it felt like it was happening overnight in the beginning. And I just kept thinking, this is going to be something that I'm going to make a difference. I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea. I need to Google like how to do any of this stuff. So I had no clue, but I just knew that I had to keep showing up. So in the beginning, it was all about just showing up, posting once a day, sharing my thoughts, getting on stories, and just kind of opening myself up to see if anybody was going to relate and going to feel like their love for their own body could maybe grow in the way that mine was. Maybe they could come along for my journey that was a little bit different than what you're used to seeing in a fat body on Instagram or social media. But by the time it was this year, earlier, I think in like January, I went to Under Armour in Baltimore. They invited me for a big event and I got to do all kinds of really cool stuff. And from that moment forward, I was like, you know what? Like, I need to start sharing more about my love for fitness. Like that, I know that that's something that I'm very passionate about. It excites me. It makes me feel so good. I'm going to start sharing more of that, like on my actual feed, which was very terrifying for me in the beginning when I first like shared a video of me doing something on my feed. It just, I don't know, it felt very odd. And like, I shouldn't be doing that, but I just kept doing it. And there's always people who are very upset by it, but there's always a lot more people who appreciate it, and it's changing how they feel about themselves, and it's getting them up and moving in a positive way. So that's kind of what makes me continue doing what I do. And even now, I mean, I could tell you, well, I do XYZ and I call myself this. I mean, I have no idea. I'm doing my best. Like every single day, I just show up however I can. Some days I can't show up, but most days I do. And if that means through a post where I'm talking about my body, great. If it's a post, me just having fun and doing something physical, great. If it's me in a very hard mom moment, great. Like I'm going to share. I don't plan out my content or anything like that. I share from the heart every day. Some days I don't. And if I'm sharing something, it's always going to be something that I'm feeling in the moment, something that currently happened. If it's words of encouragement, it usually comes from a place where I'm trying to give them to myself. And so what I'm doing is I'm journaling things towards me, and then I just kind of put that on Instagram in hopes that it helps somebody else too.
Yeah, I think I love the rawness of what you share. I feel like it is really like in process, but also not raw in a way that like it's triggering, which is hard to do, I think. I mean, it's empowering and it's building community, but it feels like you're also going through something at the same time. Like you're really present with it.
Yes. Like I could definitely use a lot of therapy I told you that earlier, but I think that there's still so much for me to unpack. And so I try and get that across to people who follow me, to just understand that I'm somebody who's still learning, who's still unlearning, who's still really just trying to grow. And it's not like I've reached a final destination, even though sometimes some photos appear that way or some messages appear that way. It's not true. It's definitely different than when I first started going on this journey a few years ago. But I just think that once you start embracing those moments that are really hard and that suck really bad and that piss you off, those moments, I have to lean into them. Like, I used to fight them, but now it's like, when I have that moment, like I was telling you about the YouTuber who did this whole video, and it shook me to my core. I didn't watch it, but I made the huge mistake of reading a few of the comments. And like, that set me back so much. And I told myself, you're not going to do this. Like, you're not going to be the person that lets this affect you. And then internally I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, you can actually feel hurt by this, because that sucks. Nobody wants that to happen to them. So let yourself be upset about it. So I let myself cry. I probably cried for like 10 minutes. I let it all out after I had this whole cry session. And I just thought that writing things down that are related to whatever you're going through, because some people say, well, write down 5 things you love about yourself. That's not always like going to be helpful. Like, some situations it might, but some situations it might not. When somebody like attacks you in that way, or is trying to hurt you and trying to make you feel like you are less than, and that you really don't deserve to exist, I mean, you really have to think about how that is just so far from true. And you have to realize also how powerful it is that that for a moment in time, they've convinced you of that. Because when I watched this video, I was convinced that they were right. I actually, in my mind, was thinking like, wow, maybe that's true. Maybe I do need to get back on this diet train and just start going through that again. But I don't know. My biggest advice is just don't run away from that moment. If it hurts, you have to let it hurt. And that's, I think, where I've grown the most on this journey.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Like, letting yourself feel your feelings, letting yourself feel the natural human response to something like that, and then processing it in a way, whatever that looks like for you. For me, I'm like an elder millennial, so I did not grow up with the internet like in high school, or not until late high school anyway, and have always been a little wary and skeptical of Facebook and social media. I got Friendster in like 2003, and then Facebook in like 2007, so it's like I was late after they opened it up to all the oldsters. That's when I got it.
Yeah.
And I've always just been a little like, I don't know. I don't want to share like personal stuff about myself, and then like doing it and getting some benefit from it, but then feeling gross and feeling like sharing too much. And I've had this very love-hate relationship with social media for years. And now that I'm pretty big on Instagram and Twitter to a smaller extent, and Facebook also, I actually kind of want to walk away from it. Like, I know it's useful for people. I know that a lot of people get benefit from reading my content there. And I get some benefit out of it, I guess, too, in terms of like sharing ideas and seeing feedback and all of that stuff. But I think just the toxic nature and the addictive nature of social media is something that I really feel opposed to now. And also some of this probably comes from having watched The Social Dilemma recently, which like catalyzed
Oh my gosh,
all of this stuff. Have you watched it? It's like, oh.
Yes. I was like, I had such an ick feeling afterwards.
I know. And it's so hard. I mean, it really is a dilemma, right? For those of us who are online and who like have it as part of our career, as part of our livelihood, right? That, like, to be online and be connecting with people in that way is important, not only to our creation of community, but like to literally what we do in the world, like our ability to sustain ourselves. And it's really complicated. But yeah, I feel like I've had so many of those moments. And I, as someone with thin privilege, like I have not gotten the kind of hate that people in larger bodies get. I see some of the stuff that you post that you've gotten, and I'm just like, fuck, like weight stigma is real. the fat phobia that's out there is so real. And I've been shielded from it somewhat. I mean, people say shit about me that's not nice too, but it's not about my body generally. And I think that having been insulated from it, I still have the same reaction to some things that I see where it's just like, okay, this is not good for my mental health to see people talking shit about me online. How can I like shield myself from that? How can I avoid coming into contact with that? Because it's toxic and it's not normal. Like that would not be a part of my day-to-day existence if it weren't for social media, if it weren't for this hyper connectedness that we have, and like the fact that people from all over the world and all corners of the troll under the bridge can like come out of that woodwork and throw things at you. For me, I feel like noticing what's going on in my body, noticing like my reactions to things, and that, yeah, it's making me sad or it's making me feel really icky or triggered or anxious. It's all accumulated so much over the years that I'm like, okay, how can I like take a big step away from this? How can I make this as pleasant as possible or safe, emotionally safe and non-traumatizing as possible for myself, while also doing the things I need to do online and getting the message out there, connecting with the people I need to connect with, and then just getting out. So I've really taken a huge step back from social media, and I have to say it's done wonders for my mental health. I feel so much less anxious, and that's in a global pandemic too, when like all kinds of other shit is going on. There's, maybe a civil war. I don't know. Like it's all just ridiculous, but that's been one thing that's helped me feel better these days.
Yeah, I try and take breaks when needed. I mean, I'll feel very good about things. Like I won't have any, sometimes I don't really open DMs. Like I'll open them when I'm feeling mentally okay to accidentally see something that was not, probably I shouldn't have. But there are times where like I open it and it's like the first 5 or 6 messages on my requests are just all like just not nice messages. And I just have to close out. And I'm like, I can't today. Like I'm not going to be able to open it today. And that's okay. I need some time to not have to look at that. And it makes me sad sometimes because I feel like at the beginning I was very much in my DMs. Like every day I would spend hours just talking to people, and, I can't really do that anymore. And I feel like maybe at some point I'll have somebody that can at least go through and clean out some of the really toxic messages I receive. That way I can go in fresh. But I mean, that has definitely ruined my experience with communicating with my community. So still trying to figure that part out. But I do take rests. Some days I'm like, you know what, for the next 2 or 3 days, I'm going to go off the grid for a little bit and kind of regroup. And because it is hard. It's hard getting on stories every day and sharing my life and constantly making sure that my stories are live, and they don't expire. Like that used to really stress me out. If my stories expired, I would be like, oh my gosh, like people are going to forget about me. They're like, it was a real fear.
Yeah. And the algorithm too. It's like, it feels like the algorithm's going to bump you down, like if you're not doing stories all the time, which is another way they keep us hooked, right? They keep us like using and making content for them to monetize. Like we're these like free laborers, like generating content on a consistent basis. Ugh.
Exactly. It's just terrible. But I try my best. And I feel like my community understands that. They usually get very excited when I respond because it is a little bit rare for me sometimes to spend a few hours in my DMs. But when I do, I mean, I'm like, it's exciting and the conversations are just kind of incredible. The experiences that people will share with me. And I feel honored to learn from other people as well.
Yeah, it's such a double-edged sword, this internet and the connectedness, and especially DMs, which are so personal. And it's like anyone can DM you. Anyone can be in your inbox in a way that people don't really email like that. There's a little bit of a barrier because I have a boundary that I created probably 2 years ago now or something, maybe a year ago on Instagram was I don't look at my DMs. Occasionally I will if it's like the first layer of like friends, like people that I follow who follow me or whatever, like that I might look at those, but I don't look at any of the other like general or requests anymore. And that's been so huge for my mental health. But I say on my Instagram, like, don't DM me, email instead. And I have a button that goes to like an email that my assistant takes them, but like she'll get them to me if if it's something that I need to see. And people don't really use it. Like people, there's just like a sort of, I think people are a little more careful about email because it's like oftentimes it's your real name or it's, it can be traced more or something like that versus social media. I feel like there's just this, I don't know, maybe it's the immediacy of it too. Like people are right there, they're reading your content. They just want to like go in and DM you right then and there or something.
Yeah.
And so that connection can be really like exciting and like present, very raw, but also that comes with so much other baggage.
Yeah, like my comments are limited, so you can't really leave there's a whole bunch of words and emojis and things that I've just completely banned from being commented on in my comments on my profile, but in my DMs I can't do that. So they can literally send me whatever they want and it's just, oh my God, the things people will say. That's why sometimes I just have to screenshot and like, I don't share their name or anything because that's not the point. I'm not seeking revenge or whatever you call it. I'm just trying to show that this is real. Like this is happening every day.
Yeah, because it is real. And I think so many people with thin privilege or even like larger bodied people who don't really post online so much might not know the kind of hate that's out there. And especially for thinner people, like, I think it's Your Fat Friend, the writer Your Fat Friend, who talks about how thin people actually maybe should read the comments. I feel like that's kind of case by case. And of course, like take care of your mental health and like don't read things that are going to be triggering to you. But I think her point is like, read the comments to understand what kind of fat phobia is out there and how it manifests and how it's directed, so disproportionately to larger bodied people.
Right. Yeah. And I'm often criticized actually, because I'm told that like, why do I constantly talk about fat shaming? Like, why don't I ever address thin shaming? Because it's real and it happens. And I'm just like, I honestly, like that conversation, I'm so tired of having it. Like, I feel like I should do a post almost every week or every month that addresses it, because the amount of people who try to like justify that, like it just, I don't know. I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's just, it's not equivalent. Fat shaming is a systemic issue. Fat phobia is part of this system of oppression that is diet culture and that is anti-fat bias. And that's something that you as a fat person have to live with every day in so many ways, like from going to the doctor and having him say, I won't be your doctor anymore if you get pregnant because you're too high risk or whatever. Like that's bananas.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Like to have to live your life like that and then be getting these toxic messages, like it's a very different thing for you with that history and that day-to-day experience and, every fat person with that kind of day-to-day experience versus a thinner person being told like eat a cheeseburger or whatever, which, is, I understand that it might be painful and that it could, it can push on some sore points, especially if you're someone with an eating disorder where you're like, I would really love to be able to eat a cheeseburger, but I can't because I'm super disordered about food and it's a whole thing. It's just not the same. It's just not the same. And thinness is so prized in our culture that for every thin shaming comment you get, there's probably 1,000 thin positive comments that are, 1 million maybe. I don't know what the ratio is, but it's a very large number. Like
yes, extremely large.
Extremely large.
The limit does not exist.
Yeah, I don't think that, especially, someone who is like a fat positive activist and influencer or whatever, like that you need to be devoting your time to talking about quote unquote thin shaming. That's not like, it's not what your duty or role in the world is. I don't know if anyone really needs to be talking about thin shaming because it's not I mean, people can talk about their own experience, of course, but I think put it into context of like, there's not this cultural mandate on people to be larger bodied that would make it such that thin shaming was actually a system of oppression that doesn't exist.
Right. I mean, like as a fat person, it feels like you're constantly living in a world that wasn't made for you. Like it's like you're not like this world really isn't. Like if you look at how you walk into a public place and as a fat person, you really worry sometimes, like, am I going to fit in the chair? Like this is going to be awkward. Or if you go to a massage therapist, am I going to be too heavy for their table? Like it's just things that you're constantly having to think about. Whereas if you're thin, I mean, the world is pretty much carved out for you to live freely in. So I think there's such a big difference.
Such a big difference. Yeah, it's a completely different thing. And, that's not to say that people who are thin, who feel bad about being thin, aren't experiencing something painful. There is still that individual pain, of course, but it's just not this collective systemic oppression that it is for fat people.
Right. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I think this is all so important and good. And I'm so glad we got to like geek out about social media stuff too. I feel like
I know
that's really been on my mind a lot lately and could just have a whole other podcast just about that, I think, these days. But
yeah, I could talk about that all day too.
I know. Well, let's have an offline gab session another time for sure.
Yes.
But meanwhile, tell people where they can find you online, your social media and otherwise, and about your book too, your forthcoming book.
Oh, yes. So I'm on Instagram at meg.boggs, and I'm on Twitter at meg5boggs, Facebook, Meg Boggs. It's just my name. And I'm on TikTok, actually. It's the same as my Instagram at meg.boggs. That's a newer thing I'm trying out. I feel so old on it, but I give it my best every day.
I know. I feel so old that I've never even looked at it. Like I've seen the little, people grabbing, I don't even know what to call it. They put it on Twitter. People put TikTok on Twitter. I see that.
I know. I mean, it's TikTok videos end up everywhere on every social media platform. It's just, they're so good.
Yeah, they're fun.
Yeah. So I recently wrote a book called Fitness for Everybody. It comes out in April of 2021. So I'm really excited about it. I started writing it at the beginning of this year. So it took me, I guess, about 5 or 6 months. And let me tell you, I knew it was going to be a lot of work and I knew it was going to be probably a little bit overwhelming at times, but oh my gosh. I mean, I don't know about you. Did you ever pull any all-nighters? Because I was like, that was my best time.
Thankfully, I did not. Definitely sometimes late at night, or I'd wake up in the middle of the night and not be able to fall back asleep and just like write notes in my phone that I would then copy over in the morning. I actually did that last night because I'm working on something now.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't know. For some reason, like that was like my time. Like at night it was so quiet in the house, like everybody was asleep. And I just felt like I could actually
I mean, yeah, having a little kid too is probably really hard to get work done.
Yeah. I mean, I would try during the day and then I could hear my husband out here and hear her screaming and I would just feel so bad. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it at night. And so I would write just in the middle of the night. I would stay up all night and just, write down all of my thoughts. And that was the hardest part for me is just, okay, I want this to be about fitness. I really want to empower women, empower all people to embrace fitness and embrace physical activity in their bodies in a whole different way than they're used to being advertised for or seen. Like I wanted it to feel different. And so I just poured everything out. And that was what was really hard, was figuring out like, okay, how do I separate all this jumble? I have all these things that I've written and how can I separate this? But it was a really cool experience. I'm so excited. The illustrations in it are really amazing and empowering. And I did an entire 12-week workout guide, which is very similar to how I train, especially if you're a beginner. And I did some powerlifting and a program. I did a whole push-up thing. I talk about diet culture, which I reference you in your book and how it changed my life. And I talk about postpartum as well. I talk about that whole experience and what it was like working out during pregnancy and after pregnancy and how it was different. It has a lot. It's a lot of my story, but also just sharing a lot of information based on the things that I'm asked the most from my community. So people always ask me, how do I get started? What equipment do I need? How can I change my mindset? How can I show up at the gym and feel confident? And these are all things that I wrote about, and I put it in this book, and I'm so excited about it.
Yay. It sounds so great. I'm really excited to read it. And so people can pre-order it now, right? When this comes out, it'll be available for pre-order. Where do they go for that? Is there a place on your website or?
My website, but it's also on my Instagram bio. If you just click on my bio, it's the first link at the top. That'll take you to the actual publisher site that'll have all the options that you can buy from, just depending on your country, your location.
That's great. We'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can find it and pre-order the book. And so great to talk to you. I really, really love this conversation.
Yes, it was. I feel like it ended too early.
I know. It's like it's an hour and plus flew by. So this is so great.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much for having me. This was incredible.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to Meg Boggs for joining us on this episode. And thanks to you for listening. If you've gotten something out of this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review to help us reach more people who need to hear the anti-diet message. You can see lots of places to subscribe at christyharrison.com/subscribe. That's christyharrison.com/subscribe. And please throw us a nice rating and review in your podcast provider of choice if you have a chance. If you're looking for some practical tips to help you get started on the anti-diet path, grab my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. Just go to christyharrison.com/strategies to get it. That's christyharrison.com/strategies. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we discussed, plus a full transcript, just go to christyharrison.com/264. That's christyharrison.com/264. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. This episode was brought to you by my book, Anti-Diet: Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is available wherever books are sold and is just about to have its 1-year anniversary. Just go to christyharrison.com/book to order it now. That's christyharrison.com/book. A big thanks to our editor and sound engineer, Mike Lalonde, our community and content associate, Vinci Chue, our administrative assistant, Julianne Watasik, and our transcriptionist, Mycroft Holmes, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show every week. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Melissa Elam. Our theme song was written and performed by Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs, and I'm your host and producer, Christy Harrison. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.